Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Cameron McGill. On behalf of the WSU Visiting Writers series and my co-director, Julian Ankney, thank you for joining us this evening as we welcome all the way from New Zealand, poet, author, and artist Josiah Morgan to Washington State University. Welcome. We're especially excited as Josiah's newest book, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, is published by WSU's Index Press and is now available. We'll be posting links in the YouTube live chat to get books. And a quick note, I hope you will join us for our last event of the spring semester on April 7th, which will be a virtual reading and Q&A with author Courtney Ann Lefebvre. WSU Pullman is located on the homelands of the Nimipu and the traditional homelands of the Paloot span of indigenous people. We acknowledge their presence here since time immemorial and recognize their continuing connection to the land, to the water, and to their ancestors. We view the land acknowledgement as a first but necessary step in our work to serve and honor our communities and our university's land grant mission. The Visiting Writer Series is committed to honoring this acknowledgement by bringing to campus writers and poets working at the top of their fields, whose voices, identities, stories, and perspectives enrich our communities, the minds and lives of our students, and our university as a whole. These events, as always, are made possible by many hearts and minds, a partnership between WSU Pullman and Vancouver English departments, the College of Arts and Sciences, Land Escapes, the Native American programs, the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art, and the Provost Media Group. So thank you all for your support of the series over the years. Before we introduce our VWS intern, I just want to say that a bit of the run of the show this evening will be that Josiah will read for about 25 minutes or so, followed by a Q&A. Keep in mind that as we get closer to the Q&A, Julian will ask you to post your questions in the YouTube live chat, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we can. So thank you so much. Welcome to all those that are joining us online. I would like to now welcome Elise Opheim to introduce our author, Josiah Morgan. Elise?
Thank you. Josiah Morgan is a writer and artist based in Christchurch, New Zealand, working across literature, theater, performance art, and curatorial practice. He is the author of 3 poetry collections, including most recently I'm Still Growing. His novella, Road, a post-lapsarian comedy, won the Macmillan Brown Writers Prize from University of Canterbury in 2022. He is also the writer of a hybrid text poetic horror memoir derived from memories, impressions, and readings of Tobe Hooper's film, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, of which it shares a title. For Auckland Pride 2024, Josiah Morgan performed a full reading of his book, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, whilst running a half marathon, among other things, alongside sound artists Bernadine Gladding and Sean McTagg. He believes in magic and the power of words to transform.
Thank you so much, Cameron, Elise, Washington State University Visiting Writers Program for having me. And thanks everyone who's joining us to have a listen to this reading. I'm going to read a range of work today that some of which is deeply located in the New Zealand tradition and maybe a little bit alien from an American listening perspective, and some of which is grounded in my wide reading in America. I'm here joining this call from Ōtautahi Christchurch in Aotearoa, New Zealand today. The specific area that I'm in, the city that I live in, is where I have my whakapapa, my genealogy. So my iwi, my tribes, are based very close to where I currently am. Kaitahu have two marae that I whakapapa to within an hour's drive from where I am right now. I'm going to begin by reading quite a New Zealand located poem from my book, I'm Still Growing. It's a joke poem. It's not particularly serious, and it does have a couple of core New Zealand references to it. What you may want to know is that the North Island of New Zealand is sometimes referred to as Te Ika a Maui, the fish of Maui. And there's a purako, a story about Maui fishing up the North Island from the sea. This poem is called Isthmus to Tip. A miracle, a spaceship, or a lighthouse poking through the leg of a pair of shorts. A cock tip, a sight at 14,000 feet, uncircumcised, white, winged, like an angel on a flight from Auckland to Wellington, NZ 459, and I, a voyeur, like God, but oh, but the miracle is that we're penetrating the high winds in an aluminium vessel going up into the sky, like that cock on exhibit, white, above Te Ika a Maui, the view, fish from the deep, sunset, frenulum, cloudline, a miracle. Okay, I'm now going to jump into a range of new material. Broadly speaking, everything that I read today might have like heavy phallic references. So that's a good framing point. I'm going to start with some lighter stuff, and we're gradually going to get a little bit heavier as we go. By the end of the reading, I'll share a little bit of work from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is the book that Index Press at Washington State University have just released. This poem is called It Could Happen to You Too. An ugly, queer little man walked into a bar. He placed a table under his tongue. He carried the table under his tongue. Though the man was bipedal, he had 6 legs then. He carried chapter 2 under his tongue. He carried a tiled roof under his tongue, diarrhea under his tongue. He carried his tongue under his tongue, a camera under his tongue, hung history under his tongue. He carried 20 Hillcrest Place under his tongue. He carried his memories under his tongue. Then the man reached out, picked the bartender up, and put him under his tongue. He put an apology under his tongue. He carried the profane exhibition under his tongue. The man put the bar under his tongue before swallowing, grinding his teeth a few times, and spitting the whole mess back up. There was no bar left for him to leave from. Okay, I'm going to read quite a long poem now. This is very rooted in the New Zealand tradition. It deals with autobiographical material, psychosis, religious themes, etc., etc. Then I'm going to read one more new piece of work, and then I'm going to jump into a couple of more extensive long readings again. This poem is called Dear Liz, and all of these new materials that I've read are from a chapbook called Black Window, which is coming out in New Zealand in August. Dear Liz, the closest I ever came to God was, and before I say this, I should offer it might be helpful to know specifically that the story I'm about to tell, I reckon, is all tied up somehow in the fact that for so many gay men in Aotearoa, their methamphetamine use is so consuming and confusing, it gets called love, or may as well be. So the closest I ever came to God was, and you're allowed to laugh, the closest I ever came to God was meeting 2 guys on Grindr who were nice, older, nice, and interested in using me as a puppy. Not my bag, but whatever. That's beside the point. They were normal people who had me lying on the carpet, edging, lying, looking up to their white plaster ceiling like it could see me. It was a stand-in for God, and it omnipotently watched me as I watched it, breathing faster, faster, slower now, faster, faster, slower now. Anyway, I'm beating around the bush. The closest I ever came to God was saying, Hail Satan, Ave Satanas, at the request of 2 normal-looking people. You see, they wanted me to sign my body, not my soul, over to the devil. They wanted me to take methamphetamine with them, but I said no, even though it's a common ask on Grindr. Probably more common in Christchurch, actually. So They wanted me to use with them and told me to say, Hail Satan, Ave Satanas. No, I'm not joking. No, I'm not fictionalizing this. This really happened. I said it once half heartedly, half with meaning, not believing, until something happened and I could say it. I couldn't say it anymore. So I left their house, never saw a ceiling like that again, never saw them again neither. But I thought, what a way to deal with religious trauma. What a way to be a lapsed Catholic, to literally hail at the altar of like cock and balls, Jesus Christ. And I actually believe in God enough to regret saying that, but whatever, I will reap what I have sown, like those two guys. We're storytelling creatures. That's what I learned in 3 years doing an anthropology degree. And I think in some ways, a poem is a prayer if you can accept that you write and then something happens outside of you. I call that spell casting because I believe the universe, the weeds, any possible benevolence comes in fact from us, from inside us. Last week, my brother started hearing voices and took himself away to a hospital room because he knew he was unsafe. Something happened in him, and then some things happened outside of him. My grandmother already accused me of dragging the family through the dirt of the very public future, but then came around because it turns out we're a family of writers, and there actually might be a book, a collective book by all of us sometime about our dirt, our public future. The thing is, these things do just happen to normal people, so we have to find our angle, cast the spell. I bring up the thing with my brother because he thought he was omnipotent. Correction, thinks he is omnipotent. He has the power to smite us and to punish us. His heart rate controls the markets, his brain, our brains. And that too is a form of spellcasting, a form of prayer. And if I could let myself succumb to that imagined control, I would, because that's love, a form of love. Not too different from placing one idea inside another and running with it, running. The only book I ever threw across the room, and this is cringe, was Game of Thrones, A Storm of Swords, when all those people died, and I was 13 years old, and the series never got as good as that again. Sometimes I think a book sucks, and then I read the acknowledgements, and it fixes something about the book for me. Bret Easton Ellis is officially part of the right-wing free speech brigade now, but I still find his books compelling, particularly since one of his dedication pages, I can't remember which one, says, for no one, which is such a dick move, but also funny as hell to me. Funny, like two lapsed Catholics getting sexual kicks out of an agnostic kid hailing as he stares at something real. Liz, what I love about you is you don't submit, you keep going. You find new questions to ask. Like when you asked in that cafe in Dunedin to me with Liz and Ethan, who was 6 and part of the conversation, like he wasn't. Like when you asked in the Swan, and I'm paraphrasing, like when you asked, don't you think it's bizarre that people say, oh, we shouldn't worry about that? They were just a product of their time. What do you mean? Of course they were a product of their time. Are we supposed to just excuse them as a result? Why? And it was a good question, and I still don't have answers. When I was 16, I turned off predictive text on my phone because I started writing poetry and I like spelling errors. And it mattered to me when I wrote, I'm on my fake account at gmail.com instead of .com. And it mattered to me that I could write down James Joyce's onomatopoeia for the sound a cat makes, which I can't remember off the top of my head. But I do know that it inspired me to create my own onomatopoeia for the sound a cat makes, which was meow. Although now that I write that, I wonder if I've remembered James Joyce's one and forgotten my own. And anyway, how obnoxious is that? Sometimes people ask, how does your performance practice and your writing practice intertwine? And the answer is they mostly don't. But sometimes I write something down and it sounds fucking stupid. And then I say it aloud and it sounds okay again. And I think that's dangerous. And I think I shouldn't have that sort of control. I believe in rhyme, in incantation. I believe in eternal damnation. I believe in our righteousness to atone and in the magic that happens when you lose control. Okay, I've got one more new one. It's short. Concavity after Grant Wood. I am in the shape of a horse, though you must know I am not a horse. I cannot run as fast as a horse, though I can keep up with the idea of a horse. I remain contented with being seen as a horse. Although the first time I saw a horse, I was astonished by the shock of the horse, the self-recognition of my own image in the horse, self-portrait of myself who is not a horse. In the distance, trees, who don't know horse is a cultural category. I'm chained to horse, but was born unchained to horse, and eventually learned as a horse has legs and can run, I'm very, very good at screaming myself hoarse. Okay, I've got one more before I head into Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This is from the Poetry Aotearoa Yearbook, which is a anthology that comes out every year. It's sort of like Best American Poems, sort of, but a lot more, like there's like 200 poets in it. So it's a wider kind of survey of the broad New Zealand poetry scene. This is the 2025 edition. We're about to head into pretty serious material. The city that I live in, Christchurch, about a decade ago when I was 12, 13, had a couple of earthquakes that basically flattened the city and resulted in quite a number of deaths. And there was a earthquake like insurance board called EQC that started up at that time. So that's important context. Um, Otherwise, I wrote this poem thinking broadly about a lot of what's going on all over the world right now. And this poem's called Delineator, and it begins with a quote by Sarah Kane, the great English playwright. It's from her character, who's just named Soldier in the play Blasted. And he says, "I'd have to shoot you, then I'd be lonely." Here's the poem, Delineator. This is how you learn about history, by living. First, it's you. Then, the crowd of tone-deaf karaoke voices singing, "I would walk 500 miles" at the top of their register, so loud you can't hear yourself think, which is what you wanted. Then, it's you, him, locking eyes through crowds of men, feeling each other up, homophobically, laughing about their proximity to each other to this love song. You don't exchange words or learn his name until after he's been inside your bedroom, cocking his body like a gun. He stifles himself, presses the air so heavy. It's like the walls have fallen in on top of you. Flash, back to 2011, a man paces outside the CTV building, trying not to picture his wife dead, dying under all that brick, and you under him like a dead body deflating of any personhood, any reason to be a person. You don't even know there's a war on until he tells you that he serves as a body in the field. Never mind asking him for what side does he fight. Never mind asking him what other men has he put his fist inside. Never mind what parts of them. Because what do you know about war? What have you survived? Sometimes you lie beneath men whose built tenement bodies collapse into liquefaction around you. Once, below one of them, you hear sirens flash from outside. You become cadaver until he empties you of what you're worth, and you know then what your body really means. He tells you he misses it, the rubble, which you miss too, also sand, swirling with the inwarding of real evil, banal like weather. As normal as the screaming women he is so contracepted to by now that on top he says things like, "Yeah, scream, bitch, nobody can hear you." The ear makes mistakes. You love him for this, even though you can finally see what he is, a weapon. Fundamentally, a part of this war, footage muted on the screen, humming to himself, "I would walk 500 miles and I would walk 500 more," as you watch in real time his exiles spread like seeds. Um, okay, that's quite a nasty poem. And a lot of my practice, broadly speaking, sits inside explorations of violence and sexuality and what language does when we think about language and violence and sex and the ways that these things can get really blurry. The book that Index Press have just put out, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I originally wrote in 2022, and it was published by a small American press. And I have looked at it again, of course, while Index have been putting it together and gone, "Wow, it's pretty mean." So, what Texas Chainsaw Massacre is like an impressionist adaptation of the film. I wrote it looking at the film shot by shot, and I'm going to read you a wee section from the end of the shot by shot adaptation. Just like a pack of dogs having fun, you think this is a party? The idea that there is no head of the table and the children can fix things can make it stop and resolve a new one. These children suddenly exist and they're screaming and yelling and running of their own accord without warning now, but warned decades ago. Amorphous white object full left. Hidden scare in the backlight, sweat, mathematics. You like this face, not a real face, slipped to a skeleton, hair pulled to turn decorative. These individuals are just a cook doing all the work, don't like it, no legacy to leave behind. You don't understand. Everything occupational, just can't take no pleasure in killing, just some things you gotta do. Weeping without warning, offers her body up implicitly, offers to eat meat, share a cigarette, up another notch, eyeball, mouth, eyeball, eye, reaction, laughter, eye, widen smirk, eye, tear, puppy dog, wider, bloodshot, fear, out of context, two invisible cuts, and motion that's relentless. Louder than ever, reaches a peak, piggy, pig fat, how a family responds to losing its matriarch, brings a woman for the kill. You ain't going no place. Wooden middens, whiskey in a jar, the taxidermy deer overlooking everything. He's the best. Hammer, dental surgery, slaughterhouse. Slaughterhouse. That's what they called it back in school when we knew each other in primary school. That's what you called it before everything turned complicated and deep purple, refused to step through the door. You knew just what it meant. Somebody poking around inside your mouth, emasculating even. Eventually you let me come inside you, but it took long enough to disentangle your old self from my new one, your wallet, a familiar shape, just about ready to cut up your driver's license, slaughterhouse, pupil, reflect the moon or merely a bulb, have a whack, bucket, just hush, familiar with the family and read to move beyond economics, sequent toward the pie making that opens sequential lights. Don't you cry none. Motion so twisted and overly complex, the breakaway makes pure sense, over the bucket, round like another pupil, bird's eye like me, dropping the essentials. None of this is easy, not to make, not to write, not to watch, not to tell you about. Drag exploitation, black exploitation, and tree exploitation underneath the whole works, the road on foot. A day for the hippie children to march down the street, signs in hand, steam and sound, and soaring the self into. The final vehicle for the final girl pulls up on the opposite side of wire fencing. Ex-picket life. There is no Chevrolet turning back, on foot, on wheels, sounds louder and more inseparable than ever before. Figure shrinking on the far side. Suddenly, a joke. Soon, to exit. Me. Too sharp. Wood chips splintering on every side. The outside air scalding. Around and around. We could have cut the sun in half. Thanks. That was a little bit from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is out with Index Press now. Thanks for having me, everyone. I'll throw over to Cameron to talk through questions.
Thanks so much, Josiah. I was gonna. I don't know if you're taking any requests.
Oh, sure, go
But
on.
there's a poem. I believe it was in the spin-off, a poem called "For
Yes.
Dennis."
Yes.
Is is
Yeah, I
is
can.
is that something you'd care to read or no? I don't want to put you on the spot. I
I'm
guess I am though. Sorry.
I'm more than happy to read that. I'll just
Okay.
pull it up.
Cool. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And then
No
yes,
problem.
we'll get some questions coming in, and then I'll hop back on and we'll start talking about them.
Perfect.
Appreciate it.
So the poem that Cameron requested is called For Dennis, and it's so I read some new stuff at the beginning that's from a chat book called Black Window. This is kind of like new stuff, and this will open what will be my next full-length poetry book in New Zealand, which is going to be called Mainstream Poetry, probably next year. I apologize. I have to read it off a phone, so I might look a little bit less engaged than I was previously. This is called For Dennis. I thought for a long time my life too ugly to make beautiful, the older men, the gold coins, the clattering of empty plates, seeking comfort in Oliver in the sound of music. Never questioned that there was darkness in the world, took that as read, like Springsteen, but missed that often ugliness and beauty were the same thing. That changed with after school, street football, eighth grade, Dennis Cooper, writing about one guy sprawled 50 feet away, sexy, but he was dead, blood like lipstick. I didn't even pick up back then that the 50 feet were of poetry as much as distance. Paris, New Zealand, Dennis, Josiah. I was shocked. Suddenly I could speak. My wounds didn't look like wounds, but monuments or structures. I've resisted pain in other people and still do, preferring the monument to the blood, like Dennis. It all rushed out at once. My teenage crush on Rupert Brooke, his handsome face, and Enrime and Finnegan's Wake, and Nabokov, Pale Fire, that great book about misreading, and the misreading, Wuthering Heights, New Juche, Wolfe, O'Hara, Bishop, Wordsworth's Prelude in both its versions on Lincoln Road, reading it over a custard square. Sometimes you read poetry, and sometimes poetry reads you.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I
No
love
problem.
the pacing in that poem so much, and that ending is just one of the things that hits uh, so true. Of course, working on the poems. I'm going to start the Q&A if that's all right with
Yeah, of course.
looking at a review that I was reading of I'm Still Growing, which
Mm,
is your fifth poetry collection. Yes.
that's right. Well, the maths gets a little bit tricky because of
Mhm.
chapbooks and things like that. It's my
Yes.
third
Yeah.
full length, and yeah,
Um, and this review was in the New Zealand Review of Books, and
mm,
reference an interview that you gave with the Post, which I just was really taken by this line. They had said that that book, or you had said that that book kind of arose from an attempt to quote develop your international work for a national audience, and
yeah,
I find that to be so lovely, and also the inverse of the norm, which is so interesting, right?
yeah,
Like I have this work I've published internationally first, and I'm
yeah.
trying to develop it for the national, perhaps New Zealand audience. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about that because it just seems just fantastic to kind of hear that
Mm.
thought process.
Well, that's lovely to hear because that's something that I think has happened very privately. I mean, of course I started publishing in the US, and the reason for that when I was younger is that I was reading a lot of small press material. I discovered Dennis Cooper, who obviously the poem For Dennis is about, and he's there on my shelf. And I felt really deeply engaged in the artistic genealogy of particularly American letters and American poetry. And it was a natural step that my work would come out in that environment at first. And New Zealanders found it really tricky for a while. I would read work at open mics or events like this that I was invited to, and audiences didn't have the frame of reference, in part because New Zealand has a really um, almost flippant, kind of ironic voice to it. Deeply connected to a kind of new lyric poetry and maybe also to our lack of poetic history. I mean, we've the actual like nation state as a nation state hasn't really existed for that long. And so in terms of building a national canon or a national body of literature, we have a limited body of work to look back on, although that's changing now. Like I think in the last 5 to 10 years, I've started to see a lot more work engaged with our past. But I became really interested in why this type of quote unquote transgressive work, this work that deals with violence and sexuality, was not landing in New Zealand because I knew that people were interested in it. I was talking to poets and I was talking to individuals who were thinking about a lot of the similar topics and subject matter and illusions that take place in autobiography. And broadly speaking, it's because of our actual publication structure, like how things get published here, which I won't go into. That's a New Zealand problem. Like that's not relevant for Washington State people. But I became really interested in what it would look like to effectively teach a New Zealand audience how to read the kind of work that I liked from overseas. But then also because after I published the first few books, I also started to become more aware of my Maori whakapapa and spent time beginning to connect with that and understand more of those pūrākau. And I was interested in uh, what it had been inside me that resisted reading New Zealand work or resisted reading a New Zealand canon for a long time. And I was interested in what would happen if I started to put active effort into manipulating the voice that I had developed in relation to US letters in the New Zealand context. And I don't have like I don't know. I don't have ambitions for like fame or anything like that. Like that's not what poetry is about, and therefore it made sense to begin to try and experiment with um, altering a voice that might be more sustainable in my lived communities, but still has that kind of thinking about a framework of a canon or thinking about like ultimately we are trying to do something that lasts more than 3 minutes here. Like poetry is not a fleeting form in some ways, I think. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I found it quite interesting to make that distinction and to think about the fact that there's probably many reasons behind that. And thanks for
Mm,
sharing that. And yeah, we've got a bunch of questions coming in from the YouTube live
cool.
audience, and the first is seem connected here, but one is about asking of the most difficult part of your artistic process. And I know that you work across a lot of disciplines and genres, and
Mm,
I think that that's quite interesting on its own. And if the difficult parts of artistic process, depending on what you're writing or working on as an artist,
mm,
changes or morphs, or if there's vestiges of those things across all of the genres. Um,
mm.
any thoughts on that in terms of how that how the difficult parts of the process may be the same or different across genres?
In terms of the broad trickiness in my life, the broad trickiness is that when I'm writing, it takes time away from performing, and when I'm performing, it takes time away from writing, and when I'm curating, it takes time away from both of those other things. And so, actually finding a balance is the bit that I find trickiest now that I am active in all of those genres. But individually, if I think about, um, I mean, even if I isolate it just to writing, uh, when working with prose, the like thick, tricky middle is a real thing. You might get 20,000 words into your 60,000 word draft, and all of a sudden it gets really sludgy and really tricky there for a little bit. Poetry, I think, is really different. I almost don't even understand how my poetry process works. I mean, what I can tell you about it is that it's highly montage, highly fragmented, highly utilizing cut up and blackout techniques, but that's often applying those techniques to my own work. And I'll often be drafting these absolutely diabolically awful poems that just like could never be shared, um, that have quite coherent meanings. And then the act of chopping those up or refragmenting those or refracting those into other topics and ideas becomes the thing that creates the sense of poetry that or the structural game of poetry. Um, and that definitely links. I mean, in rehearsing a play, you rehearse in a fragmented way. You don't necessarily rehearse in a linear fashion. Um, and you have a tricky middle while rehearsing a play as well. I think poetry is a really isolated medium than the others practically because it's almost an event. Like it's something that happens to you sometimes during your life, and you have to maintain a rigorous practice of doing poetry when poetry's not happening to you, so that when poetry does happen to you, you're ready to do it well. Otherwise, you're just going to be diabolical at those times. And that I talked about this a little bit yesterday whilst visiting one of the classes. That functions very similarly to performance art, which is different than a rehearsed kind of theatrical process, where performance art might be based around the idea of doing a task and you're just fulfilling an event. And the quality of the event is not necessarily the primary function of it. Um, so I feel there's a link there in that both poetry and performance art are things that happen to you or happen to the audience and are experienced uh, as an event, whereas I think like theatre and novels and short stories have a more crafted process. That's so not the right way to put it. I like that's yeah, craft is the wrong framing. But it's easier to break down into technical steps what a rehearsal looks like or what a piece of prose looks like is what I'm saying there. I'm never entirely sure what it is that makes a piece of performance art work or poetry work, other than that when it's done, I go, oh yeah, there it is.
Oh, lovely, lovely, lovely. That makes me, some of that makes me think of the poet Robert Wrigley. One
Mm,
time had said that he was talking to a friend of his who was a fiction writer, and Bob had said to the fiction writer, like, how do you get up every day and work on the same thing? And the fiction writer says to him, how do you get up every day and start over?
exactly.
And it's interesting to think about that, where that kind of like heavy middle is. And sometimes, like in a
Mm,
poetry, yes, it might be in the middle, but also it may be the first line
yeah.
is the heavy middle. But yeah, thank you. That's great. We've got I mean, there's a lot of questions. I'm going to try to just kind of get through.
Yeah, I'll try and answer quickly as well. I
No,
will
you're
try and be
good.
more
No,
brief.
no. You answer in whatever fashion and however long it takes. That's the beauty of it. So a question came in from someone watching online in connection to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. How has writing this book changed you?
Hmm.
And which character do you relate to the most in the book, and why?
Interesting. Um, yeah, interesting. I wrote the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the first draft of it, in 2019. So in that sense, it was actually the second book that I wrote. And I wrote it largely while on 15 to 30-minute breaks at a laser tag venue that I was working for at the time while a student. And so it was highly segmented, highly kind of time stamped as a piece of work. And it's quite diaristic in its approach. So there's two things going on in it. Well, there's a gazillion things going on in it, but broadly speaking, the book adapts the film The Texas Chainsaw Massacre as if it's an adaptation of my life and adapts my life as if it's imprinted upon the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So it's in that sense a sort of strange hybrid autobiography that also functions as a impressionist film adaptation. Uh, I'll come back to that other question, but the character that I relate most to in the film Texas Chainsaw Massacre is definitely Leatherface, which we can talk about that all day for all sorts of reasons. But the empathic core of the film is in uh, Leatherface and how he functions, and we're asked to empathize with a particular process that might not be always politically comfortable based on our assumptions as artists. I think in the film, I think it's a really interesting political film. I watched it again last year at New Zealand International Film Festival, and I thought it was surprisingly relevant for a New Zealand audience, which is part of what actually made me begin the discussion with Grant about doing the book again with Index, because I saw this film in New Zealand with a New Zealand audience, and we have a massive issue in light of the climate crisis here, based on an economic reliance on dairy farming that the country are broadly not very comfortable speaking about. And the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a film about a bunch of, at the time, left-wing hippies who impose upon rural farmland, and the family who Leatherface belongs to and becomes the core horror towards these young happy children. Um, it comes from an economic alienation from farmland, and I just thought that was really interesting in terms of some of the fears that are going on in New Zealand at the moment. In terms of how the book itself changed me, it gave me an out in some ways. I wrote a lot of really capital T transgressive material, dealing with sex and violence for a while, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was sort of a capstone to that. It sort of was a way of closing off a bunch of thinking that I had and finishing a kind of research process and thinking about violence and sex and how that related to both uh, the broad international media landscape and my lived life in New Zealand. And then the experience of the book coming out was really interesting as well, in that it got quite a lot of attention for a small press book when it had its initial release in 2022, and then went out of print for a period. I performed it in 2024 at Auckland Pride over the 6 hour long performance artwork. And at that time, that was sort of designed to be sort of like a funeral for the book, to kind of tear the book up and put it in a blender and just say, like, we're never doing that again. Um, in part as a kind of like ethical interrogation of the text. I don't think I could write this book the same way anymore, because my feelings about accessing particular types of language have changed. But then I watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre again last year, and I looked at the text again, and I was like, oh, that's pretty good. It'd be a shame if that didn't come out again. That was sort of what made the difference, really. So it changed me in the sense that it's actually the book that enabled me to come back to that New Zealand voice, actually, to tie it back to the first question. It was a way of putting a kind of capstone around thinking about how American media and my relationship to American text also had deeply influenced my voice, and how I would begin to pivot back to a New Zealand context.
Fantastic. Thank you. Maybe it cut out a little bit and I didn't quite hear, but in terms of when you read the full book doing a half marathon, it was correct?
Yeah.
And
Yes, that's right.
what did it's just I have so many questions just about that, but was that did you practice the half marathon while reading or did you just try it for the first time? Because all the
First
extra
time live. I
yeah,
trained for a few months before the performance.
yeah.
So I started running, of course, before that. But I
Mm.
also the whole performance was 6 hours long, 5 p.m. to 11 p.m., and the half marathon was around 2 hours of that runtime. And so part of the actual core training was that I would go for 6 hour walks on the weekend and I wouldn't sit down until the end of it because the advice that I sort of received from some of my friends who did running and stuff was that the trickiest thing would actually be just the stamina level and getting used to feeling what 6 hours feels like. Yeah, over that period.
Right on. Thank you. Yeah. A couple other questions have come in and I might combine these two, but um how do you decide what to write about, or what is your process for uh, thinking about the
Mm.
things, the ideas you've been holding on to as something you've processed and then something you decide to start working on? Uh,
Mm.
is that
It's
is
like
yeah.
that makes sense. This is one of the bits of the artistic process that I don't really know. I think it's similar to I can't remember that, like, it's similar to like you're sitting in front of like I don't know, like a massive stone, and like you're chipping. You just at some point you're like, oh, that's what it is, and you can see what's inside it. But that comes from the rigorous practice thing that I was talking about before. I write most days, probably every day, but sometimes the writing is really boring, and it's like a shopping list effectively. And through the process of actually doing that daily practice, at some point, and I don't know how to describe how I emerged at this. At some point, I will look back and I'll go, oh, there's been this unifying thread over the last 6 months, and usually that 6 months of writing is completely useless. Like none of that ends up making it into anything that comes out. But what that 6 months does is identify recurring patterns that I don't necessarily consciously recognize at the time. That's at least the case with poetry. With prose, it's a lot more again, maybe a lot more technical. I knew these post-it notes behind me on the wall are novel thoughts. I knew that I wanted to write this book that I'm working on at the moment, a novel about being poor in New Zealand, poverty in New Zealand, basically. And I had these short stories that I was trying to make work, and they were god awful about people between the ages of 18 to 25 who were studying and working jobs at the same time and undergoing health crises and things like that. And it was situated in a very realist kind of milieu. And none of it was working. But I was trying. I knew that's what I wanted to make work. And then I hit on one short story, which was about two young people in that same demographic who move into a flat together. One of whom is in a closeted kind of sense, engaging in Nazi discourses online. And that story still wasn't very good, but it was the seed of something. And then I taught a writing class, and a student gave a prompt uh, to the whole class about the idea of something looming. That's all it was. It was like, I want you to write a story, but like something's going to happen and the protagonist doesn't know what it was. And something about that prompt completely unlocked this novel for me, which is so it's the case now that the novel doesn't take place at all about any of the tenants. It's about their landlord, and it's about how he interacts. And I'm not going to tell you. I talked to the class yesterday a little bit about the plot of the book. It's pretty explicit, so I'm just going to leave it there for today in case people don't want to hear it. But it's like I knew there was something I wanted to work on about poverty in New Zealand, and it's now the case that the book is actually about a really wealthy guy in New Zealand, and what happens when he has to interact through narrative circumstance with the characters that I was already trying to write about. Sorry to be a little bit vague about that, but I think it might be best for everyone.
Not at all. It's your work, and you're still working on it. You can discuss with us which parts of it you want to discuss. It's all good.
Cool.
Um, so yeah, another question we got is do you often, in terms of like holding on to ideas for writing and something that happens kind of quickly and something that you put away for a while and come back to, do a lot of projects get kind of resurrected, as it were? I mean, there's so many ideas, looking at all of the
Mm.
post-it notes and like you had pointed out to. Uh, Certain things that kind of get put away for a while, and then you find them at a different time in your life and kind of bring them back to the front and start working on that project then. Does that happen a lot?
100%.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I think one problem that I have, and this is a lucky problem to have, is that I just have too many ideas. I think it's probably worse to be the other type of person, and I've got no advice for in that case. Sorry, but the having too many ideas thing often means that whatever is new and most novel is quite thrilling to me at that time, and then sometimes I have to work at it a little bit to reinvent that novelty. It's probably why I find the middle the sludgiest part of most processes. But for example, I studied the Faust narrative, Dr. Faustus, uh, in 2019 quite deeply and wrote quite a lot about it and had some poetic material that was sort of dealing with the Faust and Mephistopheles characters. And then I just forgot about it. It was while I was a student. So it was there for kind of a graded purpose, but I wasn't thinking about it in a particularly artistic lens beyond being for class. Forgot about it. And then last year, 2025, I was researching. It's hard to say exactly where this began. I was researching, broadly speaking, wanting to write a play about incarceration. And when we started writing it, we realized it was a play about Faust and Mephistopheles. And so we premiered this play last year called Faust on Trial, which is very literally about Dr. Faust in 2025. It'd be 2026 if we did it this year, which we are doing in August. And he tries to relitigate his contract with the devil to get out of it. And the audience are the jurors in this context. And at the end of the show, whichever character wins the trial, that actor gets to go home, and the other actor is locked on stage overnight until they have a chance to get free the following night. And we knew that there was something going on in our heads around the idea of like being trapped and incarceration and broad political systems all over the world. And the thing that unlocked it for us was the Faust research that happened 6 years ago in a completely different state of mind. It was kind of amazing, actually. And it was one of these times, the first monologue of the show I wrote, I mean, we were working on it half time, so 20 hours a week. We wrote at least a draft every day for the first 10 weeks of that opening monologue, and none of them were right. And finally, when we were like, should we just write it as Mephistopheles in 10 syllables per line in metered rhyming couplets? We were like, it's silly. It's an exercise. We wrote it and we were like, oh, the whole play is going to be in iambic pentameter and it's going to be in rhyming couplets. And it's going to like, it was one of those like magic moments that the thing that you think you're working on actually turns out to be something that you were already working on ages ago. That happens all the time. That's why my poetry process is so fragmented. Like I'll try and write something and then I'll be like, oh, half of the sonnet from 3 years ago just actually it's in here. That's what it is. That's how that's working. Uh, and maybe that's because I think I'm a better reader than I am a writer. Maybe that's why my process is like that. Being a strong reader definitely impacts performing as well. It's one of the reasons that you get contracted as an actor, right? It's like you're able to read text deeply and then translate it in a particular way. And I think that act of reading is actually quite a fundamental part of my writing process, being able to read past work and go, oh, that applies to this, and to understand when it's operating in a more interesting way than it perhaps previously was. I think I went away from the question a bit there, but
Good, good, good. I wonder if after writing that much iambic pentameter, if, in the weeks following, you went to a restaurant and everything you ordered, everything you said
We
was
started
iambic
we started
pentameter.
speaking in rhyming couplets. Yeah, we would be like having conversations. One of us would say something, and the other person would just accidentally rhyme with them. It was so cool.
Oh man, I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Let's see here. From the YouTube live questions, let's see. When writing about challenging topics, how do you address the autonomy of the poem? Do you consider it something necessitating bridling or something to embrace regardless of difficulty? Am I reading that correct?
Yeah, that's interesting.
How do you address the
Depends on the
autonomy of the poem? Yeah.
depends on the text. Most of the time, well, actually all the time, when writing, let the poem have autonomy. The second bit is the bit where you as an artist come in, and that's both an editorial process, the bridling thing, that's an editorial process and an intense critical process. This comes back to being a good reader. There are times where I've written poems that I think are really, really good, or the poem itself has like a real sense of force to it. And I interrogate what I think it actually means ethically a little bit more. And I go, "Oh, I'm actually not okay with that." And it just gets shelved, it gets to the side. To the contrary, that means that sometimes I'm speaking about or justifying quite complicated and sometimes violent material that does get published because I've thought about it really deeply. But one of the ways that I deal with that in the forthcoming Black Window collection, um, I didn't read any of it like this today, but in print, the Black Window collection has a lot of redactions throughout, and that's particular to this work, but that's been one strategy for dealing with content where the poem has maybe had so much autonomy that it um, needs interrogating. I mean, some of it's quite blacked out, and the blackout is an attempt to recognize both that I actually wrote that and not hide that from people, and to show the critical process as it exists. I don't have much like I don't know. I don't have much interest in hiding ethically. Like I'm quite interested in being held accountable for what I write. But as a result, I try to do it myself as well, and have for that to be something that is a characteristic of the work. In I'm Still Growing, we reprinted my first book was a chapbook called Inside the Castle, and I'm Still Growing has the entirety of Inside the Castle in it. And Inside the Castle is largely it's just reproduced basically word for word, but there's one section where I did just redact some things that I had changed my mind about. And we just acknowledged that in the you won't be able to read that, but we just acknowledged that in these little kind of appendix notes along the side, which broadly fits the way that that long poem itself actually functions, where kind of citations and things like that run down the side through that whole poem anyway. It's sort of like a 50-page long poem. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, right on. I love that. I love that idea of the kind of the self-redaction or the erasure of one's own text, and whether or not it's something where
Yeah.
you leave most of the poem there and there's the blacked out sections, or you redact almost all of it and leave just the interior poem or whatever. Quite interesting to
Yes.
see the
Yeah.
inverse of that again. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Well, no, I just sort of I could actually see the question and just yeah, I think basically embrace it regardless of difficulty, because at least in my practice, I find difficulty really interesting. I find it interesting as an artist, and I find it interesting as an audience member. Some people don't find it interesting, and that's okay. Don't read my work or whatever. I was a teenager, like, and I mean difficulty in all senses. Like when I was 15, I was really interested in reading Finnegan's Wake and Nabokov and all of that stuff. But I also was really interested in watching like Saw 4, 5, and 6, because that was difficult in another way, like very literally in terms of the sensory component. And so it's just something I'm interested in. That's probably broadly the defining thread through all of my work. It's not any one particular topic, but just broadly the characteristic of difficulty, whether that means the text is easy, but the subject matter is difficult, or the text is really difficult, but the subject matter is easy, or I'm running a half marathon. That's just difficult, also. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that makes so much sense to think of it as being all three of those things. We got One more question here that's come in.
Mm.
Um, would you speak to the links of land theft, New Zealand, indigenous peoples, farmlands, rural disparities, um,
Yep.
modernization, anything like that that is kind of a part of your work, or if this is something you would like to talk about? Um,
Yeah. I mean, the South Island where I live in New Zealand is a particularly good case study of it because I mean, you can Google, I don't want to quote figures off the top of my head, but if you have a little Google about the land deals on the South Island, it's just unbelievable. I mean, the lack of compensation in particular in the contemporary moment for stolen land and the way that New Zealand has a particular relationship to whiteness on a day-to-day basis. I actually think it relates to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre because a huge element of what's happened with that land theft has been around the production of capital to maintain a coherent nation state identity, largely around the production of milk and the production of meat, both of which are going on in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre as well. And the production of that milk and that meat is happening at the expense of people that are currently living because of historical whakapapa ties to genealogy. Um, and in the New Zealand context, there have been periods through New Zealand history where governments have attempted to quote unquote urbanize Maori individuals and actually incentivized with government policy movement into towns, um, into not into towns, into cities, away from more rural areas, which uh, has had the effect over time of just increasing social inequities that already exist across most of our major quadrants, as they do in most Western countries that have similar colonial histories. And just in relation to that trope that gets built in Texas Chainsaw Massacre of um yeah yeah the rural hillbilly um killing and slaughtering the encroaching foreigner and how that relates to the New Zealand context. That's sort of what the book's about. It's about me operating as both like uh, I mean, if I take this down, like in the New Zealand context, I will read, broadly speaking, as a Pākehā individual, i.e., white New Zealander, New Zealand European. I definitely am a white New Zealander, but I also have whakapapa. That's what this tattoo represents to Kaitahu, which is the South Island iwi. And the book is sort of about, in some senses, if it's a dual reading of me in relation to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and a dual adaptation, it's also a dual adaptation about what it means to have an artistic lineage that is deeply linked to America and a real lineage that is deeply linked to New Zealand, and trying to read those things into each other. What happens in a context where I'm both the stereotypical hillbilly and the stereotypical foreigner, and both of those things are produced from the same land and the bastardization of a particular colonial mindset. It's really complicated. And I will recommend, in particular, to Siata Avia, New Zealand writer. Her book, The Savage Colonizer book, is really amazing on this topic. And also, specifically, she lives in Christchurch. And so she specifically thinks about a lot of this stuff as it operates in Christchurch, in particular, in relation to the mosque shootings, a terrorist attack that happened here in 2019, and makes a link between that particular event and our colonial history as well. Um, I've got heaps of thoughts about that. I could talk about that for 6, 7, 8 hours.
thank you for sharing that, and maybe just for the YouTube live audience, would you mind sharing the book title and that author's name again, and then hopefully they'll be able to add to the
Yes.
chat.
Yeah. The book title is The Savage Colonizer Book
Mhm.
by Tusiata Avia, Tusiata, space Avia. And colonizer is spelled with an S because it's New Zealand spelling there. So Savage Colonizer Book.
Thank you so much. Um, any it's been wonderful to speak with you. I just want to give you an opportunity if there's anything else on your mind, a question that you wish had been asked, that you feel like talking about, or something else you want to share about
Um,
your work. Just a kind of a open open invitation there, and no pressure, but
I'll do two things. I'll read you one very short-ish poem that speaks to the question that we just asked, maybe to close us off just after this, but also just broadly to reiterate what I guess you know, Cameron, and I guess the WSU staff will know that WSU staff member Grant Meyerhofer is one of the writers that I really engaged with a lot as a teenager when developing my thoughts about the American scene, and I think that the type of writing that Grant does, like Grant is one of my favorite writers working internationally right now. And the writing that Grant does in particular around like bands, like the series of three books, SPD, The Complete Lungfish, and I can't remember the title of the other one right now, are just extraordinary texts that operate in the same way in terms of doing these subjective impressionist-ish readings that are kind of task oriented. And so in terms of being generally grateful to WSU for the opportunity to read here and talk and grateful for the questions and stuff, I just wanted to acknowledge Grant as someone that has been really quite fundamental in my reading and writing journey and still is. Like I read every time I read one of his books, I'm like, how does he do it? How does he do it? And so prolifically, unbelievable. Okay, I'm going to read you the first poem from I'm Still Growing, which, if you think, I guess, about that thought of developing international work for a national audience, this is, for most New Zealand readers, the first poem they'll ever encounter by me. It's called Untitled. Coffee, bitter. Coffee, ancestors, pillaged. We're bitter. Coffee. My ancestors were pillaged. We're bitter because we are. The coffee grinds. My ancestors were pillaged. If we're bitter, it's because we are. The coffee's just grinds. My ancestors were, to use the colloquial phrase, pillaged on these grounds. If we're bitter, it's not because we are what we eat.
Josiah, thank you so much for taking the time to read and speak with us this evening and yesterday at the class, and then the workshop tomorrow. We'll look forward to seeing you again. But thank you to everyone watching, and of course, as soon as the live stream is over, the reading and Q&A will be archived at that same link, if you would like to share it as well. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night. Thanks for joining us.
All right, everybody, the YouTube